Tonight, you'll spend 24 hours in the shoes of Luca, a forgotten assassin in Florence. He's not a legend, just another name whispered in the dark. For him, survival is a job, and every coin has blood on it. This is a mildly disturbing tales, ones you can feel under your fingernails. If stories like this help you unwind, feel free to subscribe for more. Now, dim the lights, settle in. Let's see if you make it to sunrise. And if you wake up wiser, we won't apologize. Let's begin. You wake up with your cheek pressed to a burlap sack that smells like old flour and newer regrets. The floor beneath you is cold, uneven. Somewhere, water drips. In this attic-turned hideout, the air hangs thick with last week's smoke and last year's secrets. If you squint at the grey light slanting through a gap in the roof tiles, you can almost pretend you're anywhere but here. Your body aches. Not the heroic kind of ache. There's nothing noble about a sore back, bruised hips, or the splinter you discover wedged beneath your fingernail. But it means you're still breathing. Congratulations. You survived another Florentine night with your throat uncut and your coin purse, mostly, intact. That's all a professional can really ask for. You stretch, joints popping one after another, and listen. Below you, the city is waking up. Iron-banded wheels rattling over cobblestones. A woman calling her children to fetch water. The far-off clang of church bells, doing their best to scare off both sleep and sin. You scan the shadows out of habit. Trust, here, is a currency with the worst exchange rate in history. Anyone who's ever survived a day in this city knows. Sleep is dangerous, but not as dangerous as company. Last time you let someone share your attic, you woke up with lighter pockets and a new respect for paranoia. You take inventory of your possessions by touch. Knife under the sack, purse under your shirt. Nothing left within reach that isn't worth stealing. You let out a slow breath and tell yourself, for the 1000th time, today is not about glory. Today is about not being noticed. And, if you're lucky, getting out alive. First order of business. Weapons check. You retrieve a knife, short and dull, its hilt wrapped in rags and memories. You test the edge, rough but sharp enough to get you in or out of trouble, depending on how steady your hand is. Next, you produce a vial of poison, small enough to disappear in your fist. The apothecary called it dreamless night. He also said, do not inhale, do not spill, do not ever admit you know my name. Standard medieval customer service. You wrap the knife in a rag, wipe it absent-mindedly, as much for the ritual as for hygiene. There are smudges on the blade from jobs you'd rather not remember. Your arsenal is light, unremarkable, just the way you like it. Heavy weapons get noticed. Not getting noticed is your only real protection. As you finish your preparations, you run through the day's plan, such as it is. There's a target, a court scribe with a quill sharper than most men's swords. You'll need to be quick, quiet, and, most importantly, forgettable. You catch your reflection in a cracked bit of glass, tired eyes, a week's stubble, face gone hollow from too many bad meals and not enough sleep. You don't look dangerous. That's the point. Disguise, you remind yourself, isn't about looking clever. It's about looking dull. You reach for today's costume, a faded tunic with a patched sleeve, a coarse wool cloak, a frayed rope for a belt. No jewelry, no colors, no reason for anyone to recall you at all. You smooth down your hair, adjust the shadows under your eyes. With a little luck, you'll pass for a dock worker, or maybe a journeyman carpenter down on his luck. You practice a slouch, a limping gait, a nervous cough, all the things that keep people from staring. In Florence, faces change faster than fashion. You've had more names than birthdays. Most days you're not even sure which one to answer to. The art of being invisible is equal parts wardrobe, posture, and silence. People remember stories, boldness, beauty, spectacle. You're just one more anonymous shape on the street, designed to slip by unnoticed. That's the only reason you're still alive. You take your morning meal where the light can't quite reach, hunched on a broken crate in a shadowed corner, back to a stone wall slick with centuries of cold. Breakfast is practical: a heel of bread, hard enough to break a tooth, a wedge of sour cheese, and a tin cup of water that tastes more like the river than you'd prefer. You chew slowly, each mouthful heavy with calculation. You keep your eyes on the door, your ears on the street, never fully relaxed, not even when you swallow. Nearby, a pair of laborers argue over debts, a vendor shouts about bruised apples, a dog noses through rubbish for a better breakfast than yours. No one pays you any mind. You make sure of it. There's no conversation, no camaraderie, no promise of a better meal tomorrow. Just you, your food, and the dull ache of hunger that never quite goes away. Every bite is a quiet victory. You're still upright, still anonymous, still hungry for more than just food. Florence, outside, is waking to another day of schemes and shadows. Inside, you're already planning how to make it to dusk. Florence moves faster after sunrise. Markets swell, alleys crowd. The air fills with voices and the slap of shoes on stone. You join the flow, nothing more than a man with a purpose too small to notice. Today's target is no brute, no highwayman. He's a scribe, a private notary with a reputation for perfect penmanship and a talent for forging away the lives of strangers. His work is silent and clean, but the trail of ruined families and vanished property stains half the city's memory. You watch from across the piazza, eyes half-lidded, posture slumped. He emerges from his home, in a pressed tunic, glances up at the sun, then down at his immaculate shoes. He walks like a man who's never stepped in mud, but would accuse the mud of slander if he did. You notice his habits, always checks his pockets twice, never lets his shadow stray too far, talks to no one unless he's paid to write their troubles down. His world is paper, ink, and the locked drawers in his study. He fears chaos, but he also fears being alone. You recognize the look. It's what happens when you know exactly how fragile your security really is. You shadow him through the crowd, counting his steps, his glances, his pauses to wipe sweat from his brow. Patience is your weapon. The city whirls around you. Hucksters, merchants, beggars, pickpockets, nuns selling prayers at half price. Nobody notices you, the way nobody notices dust on an old coin. By the time the scribe disappears back into his office, you know his route, his rituals, his windows that stick in the humidity, and the door he never bothers to lock after lunch. Assassins aren't predators, they're parasites. You wait for the perfect moment, not because you're brave, but because the alternative is a headline, not a legend. There's a place in every city that smells like secrets. Mildew, cheap wine, and old sweat. That's where you find Cohen. Some call him the barbarian, others just mutter and cross themselves. He's a relic, bald, scarred, an eye milky and blind, the other sharp as a hawk's. No teeth left, but plenty to say. His coat hangs off him like he lost a fight with a laundry line. Cohen is legend for one reason. He knows things you don't. He collects whispers the way bakers collect crumbs, never throwing anything away, especially not your trust. He sits on a crate, muttering to himself, fingering the handle of a broken mug. You approach quietly. Cohen always knows you're coming, even when you don't. He doesn't need small talk. You slip him a coin. He slips you a name, a detail, a warning. Watch his hands, not his face. All his lies are in the ink, not the eyes. There's no gratitude, just a nod. Information from Cohen is never free. He'll trade you a secret for a story, and tomorrow, he'll sell yours to someone else. Still, you'd trust his gossip before you'd trust a priest's blessing. When you leave, you're weighed down not by gold, but by the sense that in this city, legends don't die. They just get grubbier.
You walk on, keeping your head down, letting the restless city guide you toward your next stop, the apothecary. The apothecary's shop is 3 steps above the street and about 5 degrees colder. Inside, shelves sag with bottles, bundles of herbs, jars of powder. The smell is overwhelming, sweet, bitter, sharp as vinegar, undercut by the distinct odor of ambition gone wrong. The apothecary is as careful as you, hands always moving, eyes never quite meeting yours. He recognizes you, of course. No one buys nightshade at dawn without a reputation. You don't exchange pleasantries. You ask for remedy for sleeplessness. He fetches a vial, heavy with promise and warning. You pay in coins, one at a time, each falling with the weight of confession. He offers a few words, half advice, half threat. Use only a drop, and only on those who deserve it. You pocket the vial, feeling its chills seep through the wool. You nod and disappear into the street, already blending back into the crowd. Here, poison is the one thing no one questions, because everyone fears the answer. After midday, Florence breathes heavier. Sun sharpens on the rooftops, and the heat bakes the stink of tanners' yards, bread ovens, sweat, and river silt into the stone. Market cries rise, dogs bark at nothing, flies swarm the fishmonger's cart, and you, just another face in the crowd, find your place where you can watch and not be watched. Your target is still the scribe, but now you see the layers. He's the kind of man who polishes his shoes before writing ruin into the lives of strangers. He carries himself like he expects the stones to move aside for him. His world is measured in neat lines of ink, in the sound of wax seals, in the silent terror of those who stand before him. You loiter at the edge of the piazza, your back pressed to a sun-warmed wall, hat pulled low. There's a rhythm to his day, as predictable as the tolling of the bells. Midday, lunch in the same tavern, always alone, always with a book. After, he walks the long way home, as if time is his to waste, and fear is for other people. But you know fear. You watch how his eyes flick sideways at every shadow. You see him count his coins, double-check the clasp on his satchel, glance at his reflection in a shop window, and shudder. You spend an hour leaning on a barrel in the fish market, another hour crouched on the steps of a chapel, watching pilgrims pray for luck. You become part of the city's background noise. Nobody remembers a man who sits too long in the same place. You fidget, you cough, you mutter to yourself. Your disguise isn't your clothes. It's your ability to be so forgettable that even the flies pass you by. As you wait, you draw a map in your head. Alleyways choked with laundry and secrets. Windows that stick in the heat. Doors that creak. The shortcut past the baker who owes you a favor. You run through every contingency. If he leaves early, you'll follow. If he brings a friend, you'll melt away and try again tomorrow. If he gets wise, you'll have to improvise. Again. In your line of work, every plan is a hypothesis, waiting to be disproved by life's worst timing. You're ready to wait all day if you have to. You're ready to walk away if you sense a trap. It's not heroism. It's professional paranoia. You know that most assassins die because they hurry. You're Luca. You can wait. Just when you convince yourself you have the upper hand,
Florence reminds you who's in charge. A storm gathers in the west, thick blue-black clouds stacking above the domes, promising rain before evening. The streets clog up, the market clears out, and every child in the city seems to decide it's the perfect moment for a screaming contest. You try to slip down your chosen alley and find it blocked by a cart overturned, a donkey tangled in its own harness, fish and cabbages everywhere, the stench thick enough to knock out a bishop. The scribe, who should be at his desk, is nowhere to be found. You scan the square. He's talking with a priest, laughing at something you'll never know, and then veering off your map entirely, into a crowd thick with pilgrims and tax collectors. You pivot, lose the hat, grab a broom from a doorway, become Luca the Sweeper, back hunched, eyes lowered, invisible again. A passing merchant scolds you for dirtying his steps, and you apologize in a voice that sounds nothing like your own. But the day unravels further. A pair of city guards argue under your target's window, one of them eyeing the passers-by with the suspicion of a man who's been burned before. A little girl drops her doll in front of you, and as you stoop to pick it up, you realize you're standing right in the sightline of a neighbor who's seen you twice today. Every part of the plan you rehearsed that morning, gone. It's improvisation now. New route, new story, new exit strategy. You rehearse your alibi for the 5th time, adding in a limp, a fake name, a cousin who works at the mill. This is where professionals show their worth. You whistle, you stretch, you yawn as if boredom is your only worry. But inside your mind races. For every threat you see, you know there are 3 you don't. By the time you catch sight of the scribe again, he's changed direction, retracing his steps toward the square as the first drops of rain begin to fall. You wait, patient but anxious, telling yourself no plan survives Florence at rush hour. But Luca survives. At least, so far. With chaos swirling, you duck into the alley behind the Tanner's Guild, a place where the air is so heavy with ammonia and animal hides that it's hard to tell if you're breathing or drowning. The guildmaster waits by the door, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, posture that says, "I've seen worse, but not much." He looks you up and down, like he's pricing defective goods. "Thought you'd be quicker," he mutters, words flat as old leather. You give him your best "I've got this" smile, one you hope is more confidence than confession. "Timing is everything," you say, as if that makes the mess outside your fault or your genius. He grunts. Timing. Tell that to the families sleeping on the street because of that bastard's pen. His gaze lingers, accusing, disappointed, desperate. You reassure him. It's under control. By sunrise, your people will have one less enemy. He shoves a coin pouch into your hand, rough and sudden. No more delays, no more excuses. Do it clean, and don't let it come back to me. You nod. The job is never just about the money. It's about not leaving any questions behind. As you leave, you hear the rain begin to drum on the tiles above. The city cools, the air thickens, and you remind yourself, if the city gets its way, nobody wins. But you're not here to win. You're just here to make it through another day. Evening presses in, heavy as wet cloth. Florence glows in candlelight, but you hug the alleys where the light doesn't reach. It's a city that looks beautiful from a distance. Up close, the beauty is just another kind of disguise. You stop beneath the eaves of a shuttered shop, letting the rain drum its lullaby above you. Your heart ticks time with the city, nervous, irregular, never quite steady. You replay the plan for the 100th time, through the side gate, up the back stairs, past the watchdog who's never learned to bark at regulars. In through the kitchen window, left ajar by a servant who hates his master almost as much as you do. You check your kit again. Blade sharp, vial corked tight, cloth for cleaning, coin for bribes. Your hands tremble. You tell yourself it's excitement, but you know it's fear. And that's the only honest thing you've got left. You take a breath, steady and slow. Some people pray before a job. You prefer pep talks, the kind you give yourself because no one else would bother. Luca, you mutter, if you were meant for greatness, you wouldn't be hiding behind rain barrels waiting to murder a man over paperwork. A smirk, a shrug. You remind yourself, not a hero, not a monster, just a man who's good at doing things nobody wants to admit need doing. You push away from the wall, roll your shoulders, and step out into the storm. The city doesn't notice. It never does.
The scribe's house is quiet, save for the soft sound of rain against the shutters and the faint crackle of a fire in the study. You circle the garden, crouched low behind a row of wet cabbages, the mud sucking at your boots. A quick hop over the fence, and you're at the kitchen door, heart pounding in your ears. The window opens with a creak. Inside, the kitchen is empty, save for a loaf of bread, a pot cooling on the stove, the ghost of someone else's dinner. You move silently, feet finding the quiet spots on old tiles. In the hallway, shadows flicker. You see your target hunched over his desk, pen scratching, eyes squinting at some poor soul's doom written in ink. He's so focused he doesn't hear you, until your shadow falls over the page. He turns, mouth open. You're on him in a heartbeat, one hand over his mouth, the other plunging the blade. A fast, practiced move, right where you were taught. The poison works quickly. The scribe gasps, claws at your arm, eyes wide with shock, then slips away into silence. You wipe the blade on his sleeve, calm, methodical. You scan the room. Stacks of documents, a locked box of seals, a silver signet ring, his personal crest, known across the city as the stamp of someone else's ruin. You pocket the ring and a handful of papers, enough proof for the guildmaster, enough leverage for yourself if things go wrong. Every instinct screams at you to run, but you take a moment to check for witnesses. Nothing but the hiss of rain and your own pulse in your ears. You retrace your path, slipping back through the kitchen, over the fence, into the wet anonymity of the alley. Behind you, a life ends with a whisper. Ahead of you, the city doesn't notice. It never does. Your job isn't finished until the city forgets you were ever here. The knife? Into the river, where secrets float downstream and memories dissolve in the silt. The vial? Smashed on the stones behind the bakery. Your gloves? Tossed in a fire barrel, where their story burns away with the scraps. You clean your hands at a public fountain, the water icy, the taste of guilt washing down the drain. You change your gait, swap your cloak for one hanging from a fence, add a new smudge to your face. By the time you reach the main road, you're just another laborer headed home in the rain. The ring feels heavy in your pocket. A token for the guild, a warning to anyone who thinks ink is a shield against consequence. As you melt into the crowd, you keep your head down. Nobody stops you. Nobody asks questions. Not tonight. Florence keeps breathing, streets shimmering with rain and secrets. You survive the job. But that's only ever the beginning. Rain falls harder now, slicking the cobbles, erasing footprints almost as fast as you make them. You keep to the narrowest lanes, blending with merchants closing shop, servants hauling firewood, drunks arguing with the night. Nobody's looking for a killer. They're all too busy surviving their own evenings. You adjust your stolen cloak, tilt your hat lower, join a procession of townsfolk filing toward the square. A toothless old woman grumbles about the price of onions. A child pulls on your sleeve, begging for a crust. You hand over the last of your bread, buying 2 seconds of invisibility. Every city has its rules for going unseen. Tonight, it's all about blending in, moving at the city's speed, not your own. The more ordinary you look, the less likely anyone is to remember your face, your walk, or the ring heavy in your pocket. At the corner, a watchman scowls in your direction, then looks away. You're one of 1,000 stories he won't bother to hear. By the time you reach the riverside, the world has narrowed to puddles, shadows, and the hush of a city, exhausted by rain and secrets. Florence at night is a different city. A warren of half-lit alleys, echoing footsteps, doors that don't open for just anyone. You slip through a maze of back streets, always listening, always glancing back. A dog barks 2 streets over. A window bangs shut. You cut across a market stall stacked with crates, scattering rats and curses in your wake. Your hideout tonight is an abandoned storeroom behind the Tanner's Guild. The smell is sharp. Leather, lie, old fear. It's perfect. No one will look for you here. No one will want to. You press your back to the wall, counting the coins in your pouch, the breaths in your chest. You resist the urge to check the ring in your pocket every other minute. Out here, you trust no one, not even your own memory. Every sound is amplified. Boots splashing through puddles, distant laughter, a cartwheel rolling somewhere far away. You let the fear wash over you, because ignoring it is how you end up dead. Just before midnight, you slip out for one last errand. Your contact waits beneath a broken lantern, shadow bleeding into shadow. He's thin, unremarkable, the sort of man you'd never notice if he wasn't the one holding your next meal ticket. No greetings, no small talk. You pass him the ring, the evidence. He passes you a pouch, less heavy than you hoped, but more than enough to keep you alive another week. "Don't come back for a while," he mutters. "I never do," you reply, voice as dry as last year's bread. Money changes hands. The city shrugs. You fade back into the wet night, lighter by one secret, and heavier by everything else. You find a place to collapse, under an awning behind a baker's shop, where the rain can't quite reach, and the smell of tomorrow's bread mixes with the sour tang of sweat and nerves. You pull your cloak tight, count the heartbeats in your chest, listen to Florence dream on the other side of the wall. You wonder if the scribe's ghost will haunt you, or if he'll just become another story in a city already choking on stories. You're not a hero. You're not a monster. You're just Luca, a man who did what needed doing, and who will do it again tomorrow if it means waking up alive. You drift towards sleep, the city breathing slow and deep around you, your mind tracing the lines of another job finished, another secret swallowed by the rain. Tomorrow, you'll have to start all over. But for tonight, you're just grateful for the dark, the quiet, and the chance to dream, if only for a little while. The story fades, but the city keeps whispering. If you've made it this far, wide awake or half asleep, you're built for more than just old legends. But maybe, before you drift off completely, you want to know what's real behind the shadows. Who were the true assassins? How did their world actually work? The secrets, the betrayals, the cold facts behind the warm lies. If you're still with me, here's your reward. A slow drift through the true history behind the tales. You can let your eyes close. You don't have to remember every detail. Just float along as we step quietly out of the story and into the midnight archive. Let's see what the records really say. Let's begin. Who was a medieval assassin? When you think of a medieval assassin, maybe you imagine a shadow in a black cloak, slipping through alleys with a silver dagger and a vendetta as old as the city itself. But the reality was both less glamorous and more complicated. The word assassin in Europe had a reputation borrowed from the East, specifically from the legendary Hashashin, the feared sect whose name still haunts stories of the Crusades. But most killers for hire in medieval Europe were nothing like the myth. They were men, and sometimes women, pushed to the edge by poverty, desperation, or the quiet offer of a patron who needed a problem to disappear. Society knew them only by rumor and by aftermath. Nobles whispered of solvers, shadows, or the man with no face. Ordinary townsfolk preferred not to believe such people existed at all. But in every city, there were always stories. A merchant who died without a mark, a councilman gone missing. A feud ended overnight with no trial, no witnesses, only the silence of fear. Medieval assassins weren't part of a brotherhood or a guild. They didn't wear symbols or take sacred oaths. Most were drifters, former soldiers, ruined tradesmen, outcasts, even priests fallen from grace. They lived in the margins, invisible when needed, unwanted when not. The best ones left no legend behind them. Their greatest talent was in vanishing, first from the scene, then from memory, until only a rumor, a sigh, or a chill in the marketplace marked their passage. How did one become an assassin? There were no schools, no teachers, no recruitment posters in the medieval world. Nobody grew up saying, "I want to be an assassin." But war breeds killers, and peace breeds men who know how to survive when swords are no longer needed. Most assassins began as something else: a foot soldier with too many bad habits, a street thief, learning that silence is worth more than muscle, a servant who overheard too much in the wrong room. Sometimes it was a matter of being in the right place at the wrong time. A whispered job offer, a coin under the table, a name and an address. No contracts, no witnesses. Just trust, and the understanding that trust was disposable. Patrons, nobles, merchants, sometimes clergy, never handled things directly. A third party, a broker, would find someone desperate enough or skilled enough, and that was that. Payment was usually quiet, sometimes generous, always deniable. Sometimes an older hand would pass on a few tricks: how to blend in, where to buy the best blade, which alley was safest at dusk. But there was no formal mentorship. Every job was a test, and failure was final. The most important lesson came early. You only get to make one big mistake, and in this business, nobody keeps score for long. Methods and tools of assassination. There was no signature weapon, no magical arsenal. A medieval assassin's toolkit was whatever worked, and whatever could be forgotten, lost, or thrown away in a hurry. Blades were the favorite. A short dagger, small enough to hide in a sleeve, sharp enough to end an argument before it started. Some preferred a misericord, a narrow knife designed to slip between ribs or through a gap in armor, as silent as breath. Strangulation was another old art. A length of cord, a garrote twisted tight, a pillow in the dead of night, anything that left fewer stains for the city watch to find. But sometimes, the quietest weapons came in bottles and pouches, poisons made from deadly herbs, wolfsbane, belladonna, hemlock, or the dangerous powders sold by apothecaries with short memories. A sprinkle in wine, a drop in soup, a powder dusted onto a letter, slow, steady, and deadly. The problem with poison? Sometimes the one who mixed it didn't live long enough to regret it. The real tool, though, was deception. A good assassin blended in, a merchant one day, a priest the next, a laborer on market day. Disguise, confidence, and knowing which faces to forget and which to remember, that was the true art. Escape routes, hiding places, false alibis, these mattered as much as the blade. Above all, speed and silence ruled. The best job was one nobody ever noticed. Day-to-day life and routine. Stories make the assassin's life sound glamorous. A parade of midnight chases, secret meetings, and stolen gold. The truth was mostly monotony. By day, a killer for hire lived like anyone else. He found cheap lodgings in neighborhoods where nobody asked questions. He ate at crowded taverns, paid with coins that carried no stories, always with his back to the wall. Every glance was measured, every handshake suspect. There was always the next job to plan. That meant days of waiting, watching, memorizing a target's habits. He learned the city's pulse, when streets emptied, which doors stayed unlocked, which alleys flooded in the rain. Trust was a fantasy. Every relationship was provisional. Friends, lovers, even family. If you were smart, you kept them all at arm's length, or risked them becoming another weak link. Most days were spent in patience and anxiety. Each job was a high-stakes wager. One mistake, and you joined the ghosts you'd created. A routine of boredom, broken by brief, sharp moments of violence. The only luxury was surviving to worry about tomorrow. Challenges and dangers. The world of the assassin was a web of threats, some obvious, some invisible, until too late. Law was the most immediate. In most cities, murder for hire was a crime with a single punishment: death, and usually in public. Watchmen patrolled, and neighbors whispered. A single mistake, a witness, a dropped knife, a too familiar face, could bring the scaffold closer with every step. But the greater danger often came from betrayal. Sometimes it was a client who decided silence was cheaper than a second payment. Sometimes it was a fellow criminal with a secret to sell, or an informant eager for a pardon. Even success was dangerous. The more jobs you finished, the more people knew your name. The more people knew your name, the closer you came to a quiet end, alone in a gutter, the city already busy forgetting you. Loneliness was another cost. Trust was a memory. Even sleep was a gamble. Nobody ever felt truly safe. You lived every day with your exit mapped, your story rehearsed, your nerves never quite at rest. Social, political, and economic status. Officially, an assassin was an outcast, neither citizen nor outlaw, but something in between. Too useful to banish, too dangerous to trust. Most worked for the powerful, nobles, merchants, even bishops who preferred not to be seen doing their own dirty work. The arrangement was always unspoken, always deniable. The payment? Sometimes generous, often less than promised, always wrapped in threats and fine print. A successful assassin might live for a time in comfort, but it was comfort paid for with constant vigilance. Having a family was rare, a vulnerability no one wanted. If you had loved ones, you kept them hidden or never saw them at all. Among the poor, assassins were sometimes admired for their cunning, but more often feared or shunned. The rich treated them like loaded weapons, valued when needed, discarded when dangerous. In the end, status was a matter of survival, not respect. You existed on the margins, neither celebrated nor condemned, just a shadow in the ledger, erased when the job was done. Famous assassins and historical cases. Most medieval assassins were nameless, whispers in the dark,
ghosts on old streets, but a few left stories too bold or bloody to be forgotten. There were the Hashashin, the assassins of the East, whose very name haunted crusaders. Hidden in mountain fortresses, they made their reputation with the knife and the sudden public killing of leaders, reminders that fear could be as powerful as armies. In the West, murder was rarely so organized, but the effects could be just as explosive. In 1407, John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, arranged the murder of his cousin, Louis of Orléans, in the heart of Paris, a killing that sparked civil war. A century later in Florence, the infamous Pazzi conspiracy saw assassins strike at the Medici during Sunday Mass, their blades setting off years of vendetta. Sometimes the assassins were celebrated, like Jacques Clément, who stabbed King Henry III of France and was hailed as a martyr by some. More often, they were quickly forgotten, their deaths hurried along by the same hands that had hired them. Records survive in chronicles, court cases, and letters, but the details are always blurred, written by the victors, shaped by rumor, colored by fear. The one constant: for every famous killing, there were 100 more lost to silence. Comparison to modern assassins. Strip away the centuries and the disguises, and you find that the essentials of the trade haven't changed much. Then, as now, the assassin is defined not by weapons or methods, but by the ability to disappear, before, during, and after the act. The reasons for hiring a killer remain: money, power, revenge, or the cold calculus of politics. But today, technology has changed the rules. Medieval assassins used blades, garrots, and poison. Modern ones might use guns, bombs, or simply a well-placed virus, biological or digital. Escape routes once meant alleys and riverboats. Now they're burner phones, false passports, and encrypted channels. The biggest difference is the spotlight. In the past, a successful job was a job nobody noticed. Now, assassination is often a message, delivered to the world in headlines, surveillance footage, breaking news. What hasn't changed is the shadow, the constant tension, the price of trust, the knowledge that even when you succeed, you're already living on borrowed time. In both worlds, the best assassins are still the ones you never hear about, because they were gone before you even knew they were there. Dark humor and irony in the assassin's life. Even in the grimmest trade, irony found its way in. Assassins learned early that life was unpredictable, sometimes absurdly so. You could spend weeks planning the perfect hit, only for your target to die of food poisoning the night before. Or you might poison a cup meant for a rival, only to have the client's own servant drink it by mistake. Stories spread in low voices at the back of taverns, of killers hired to make it look like an accident, who ended up botching the job so thoroughly that nobody believed the official story. Of a knife meant for a noble that instead nicked a bishop, setting off 3 years of lawsuits and at least 2 excommunications. Sometimes, the greatest risk was success. Complete a job too well, and your employer might start to worry you'd work for his enemies next. Or, in the greatest punchline of all, you might survive every job, only to be betrayed by a friend, a lover, or your own apprentice, eager for a shortcut to your shadowy place in the city's pecking order. The jokes were never loud, but they were honest. You only retire from this business one way. And when the laughter died down, the city was just a little quieter and a little colder. If you're still awake, congratulations. You're as stubborn as the shadows themselves. Not everyone makes it to the end of a story like this. But then not everyone is drawn to the quiet corners of history. If you've listened all the way through, let me know in the comments. Write, "I survived the night,"
or share what you'd like to hear next time. Every message, every idea, every whispered legend helps keep these stories alive. Remember, the real world is full of secrets, some hidden in the dark, some hiding in plain sight. The best assassins vanished without a trace, but the best listeners, they leave a mark, if only in memory. So turn out the light. Let your mind wander down old, silent streets, and may your sleep be deep, dreamless, and just a little mysterious. Good night.